Welcome to episode 44 of Lost in Translation with Bobby Martin. I'm Sam Perkins. We are coming to you today from our WCTV studios in Wilmington, Massachusetts. We are joined by former Siena College head coach, long-time coaching career, former Siena College and University of New Hampshire player, overseas pro, Carmen Maciariello. Carm, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
I'm not going to lie. I thought it was Maciariello. That's what.
So over there, Maciariello.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm good. All right.
I'm doing great. Just obviously taking some time to enjoy the family and just really excited to be chopping it up here with you guys.
I always ask this question of people when they come in because it's kind of open ended, but I love the different answers. You know, your history with the sport of basketball has been a very long one, even though you're not an old guy, but it's just been a part of your life, I know, for forever. What would you say at this point, now looking back, about the sport of basketball and what it has meant to you and what it means?
Man, it's funny. I did an interview the other day, and you're asked what's your favorite basketball movie, and the guy gave me a list of like 3 or 4. And I said, none of those. I said Hoop Dreams. And, I love the story told about William Gates and Arthur Agee. But for me, it's about the love of the game. I was a kid that just started playing basketball just recreationally in like 4th grade. And I was terrible. And, there were some stories on that, how, my first camp I went to was at Siena, and they gave me a report card and it had 1s and 1-4. And I was thinking all the 1s were good and the 4 was like something to work on. And it was the exact opposite. The 1s were I was terrible at everything, and the 4 was I had a great attitude. But you know what? I've always loved the game, even right now, just really being around. I volunteer, I speak to different groups, women's basketball, girls, varsity basketball, rec basketball. I always enjoyed giving back to the community, and that was something that I really hung my hat on at Siena. There was a couple years where, we were out in the community at least 50 times to do different events and to be visible, but it was more because of who I was and not that my position was as a head coach. But I would say just the love of the game. I mean, similar to what you guys are doing here, just passionate about the game, passionate about helping people, helping kids, building relationships. But I think it comes back to the love of the game. Like you could sit me down in front of a TV or a computer, and I could just watch games for hours upon hours. And I plan on doing that this year.
How did you originally get into the sport? Why basketball? What was it about hoops? Do you remember when it was that the passion sort of started and how you got into the sport?
You know what? I was a soccer player for most of my, childhood, from like 7 years old to probably about 14 or 15. But I always just loved playing basketball. I loved, being able to be on the court. I loved being able to run up and down and jump and catch. I think it was just more being an athlete. I still remember, when you're a kid and you're in elementary school or junior high, and you have like those field days at the end of the school year, right? And you're out and you're trying to beat your friends in a 50-yard dash. You're trying to beat them in the hurdles. You're trying to, be able to throw the football the farthest. So I just really enjoyed being an athlete. And to be honest with you, I think that's what made me a good basketball player, because I loved the sport. It wasn't something that my parents pushed me to do. And by no means was I good early, I think, but I kept wanting to be good, right? You see things on TV, or you see your friends or older kids being able to do things, whether it's, behind the back, an in and out dribble, a 3, a dunk, whatever it may be. And I wanted to be able to do that stuff just to be able to accomplish that goal, but also just to be able to have more fun playing, right? The game of basketball at its purest form is fun and enjoyable. And I think sometimes that escapes everybody, right? And the best teams I coached, the team that won the MAC championship in my first year as a preseason 6th pick, and we won 10 straight. We were 14-0 at home. That team just really loved playing with one another. But I also think it's about the people you surround yourself with.
So as a young, how much do you think that soccer contributed to your ability to play basketball? I think now what you see is a lot of kids, basically devoting every bit of their time to one sport. How did that multiple sport approach that you took help you? What do you think about these guys just giving all the time to one sport?
I'm against it. I think you have to be well-rounded, especially at a younger age. And now that means what's a younger age, right? I say from like 7 to 13, 14, you want to have fun. You want to figure out what you love to do, because then also once you specialize in an area, you'll see those jumps, right? I went from a guy being, people said a Division III basketball player to a Division I recruit in 2 summers, just based on being able to work. I think when you specialize kids at a younger age, especially if it's what, the parent or the grandparent or the guardian wants, a lot of times they're doing that for selfish reasons, to relive maybe some past that they had, to bring back great memories for them, where I think when it's pure joy and the kid really just enjoys playing the game and they play just because they want to have fun and it's something they like to do, I think you get exponential growth. And then the other thing is, I think you can burn kids out. I think they need to be well-rounded and do other things. So when they do come back to play basketball after soccer season or volleyball season or whatever it may be, now it's refreshing again and it's enjoyable. You don't want the process of getting better to become boring and mundane.
Tell me, you talked about going from someone that, you said was viewed as like a Division III prospect to a Division I scholarship level player, you said, in like 2 summers. Tell me about that sort of transformation. Do you remember things starting to click? When you weren't on Division I schools' radars, was that always the dream, or were you kind of more just like, hey, I just want to play somewhere in college?
No, that was always the dream. I always wanted to play Division I basketball. I always wanted to play overseas professionally. Obviously, you want to play in the NBA, right? Everyone wants to play in the NBA, but I knew that would be tough. But that didn't stop me from competing against the best. I still remember different tournaments we were at, and guys we played against, going to 5-star and Eastern Invitational were the 2 biggest camps then. No, it was just work. I enjoyed the work, and I was a guy that was saying no to parties, no to girls, no to the movies, no to vacation. I still remember it was my 9th grade year. I just finished freshman basketball or JV basketball, 9th or 10th grade. My parents went on vacation in February break down to Florida, to Key West. And I was so mad because I had a chance to get bumped up to at least practice with the varsity before sectionals. And my parents wanted me to go on vacation. So I made them buy me a basketball, and there was a court at the condos we were staying at down in Key West. And so that's all I did every day. I'd get up and I'd be outside at the court for like 4 or 5 hours, and then I'd eat. And my parents were like, well, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. But I was missing competing. And, it just was about that discipline, that dedication. And I kind of took that same approach as a coach, right? So many people say it's so hard even to get into Division I basketball and being a director of ops or a support staff or even, an assistant. I was fortunate enough to be a head coach and, win 2 regular season titles and, have some, some pretty good success. But I think it just comes down to that discipline and there's always a consequence for your decisions, right? There's always, hey, well, if I'm going to do this, I can't do that. And that's eventually how you have to live your life.
Well, it's funny you said that. My grandmother was big on sayings, and she used to say that when you say yes to one thing, you're probably saying no to everything else. So, you have to decide. This is a decision. There was no sacrifice in you doing what you did. It was a choice. You wanted to be out there, and it's wonderful to hear. What do you think about the kids today? And I mean, you've had to recruit them. What do you look for when you're recruiting kids? What are those principles that you need to see in that kid to continue to recruit him or have a chance of getting him?
Yeah, so obviously on top of the talent piece, right? I think that the talent's obviously, that's takes care of itself. But then you got to see that, are they a good person? Can they communicate? And I had more success and probably what hurt me this past season, we really struggled. I didn't have any per se true leaders in the locker room. The teams that I had that were really good and that were a connected group, I had fifth year, sixth year guys in that locker room. But I think you got to look for leadership potential. I think you got to look for selflessness. You got to look for guys that can communicate. And then they have to be honest, right? I'd rather have, as a head coach, I'd rather have guys tell me the truth that they were struggling here, or they didn't get along with this guy, or this was an issue, than not say anything, right? The guys that can't communicate hurt you. The guys that don't give of themselves and only care about themselves hurt you. So I think, being able to get through that intel piece and get through those weeds with really getting the truth, because parents aren't going to tell you the truth. The AAU coach isn't going to tell you the truth, because they want to get that kid a scholarship. The parents want that kid to go to school for free. Now, that's not even talking about NIL money and what they need to come, which also I think muddies the water a little bit. But yeah, I think some of those things, I'm a big fan of really evaluating that young man when we're on an official visit at a dinner, right? Does he know to have the discipline to leave his phone in the hotel or leave it in his pocket? He doesn't pull it out, at the table. How is the conversation with mom and dad when I ask the young man a question? Do mom and dad try to answer? Well, that's not showing that you're your own person, right? So, I think there's a mature piece that comes with it. And then also, like you said, hey, you want to be great, you got to say no to a lot of things, especially in college, and say yes to sleep, and say yes to extra work and taking care of your body. And, also you have to say yes to being able to maybe be around your teammates, right? It's easy if you're getting paid money after practice, get your shots up and leave and go get yourself a meal. Right. It's a little harder to organize a team dinner or say, hey, let's all go grab something. The best teams I've been around had those charismatic leaders, had those kids that cared about their teammates more than themselves. And that's a lot of the stuff you got to find out when you're recruiting.
Bobby has brought it up several times, and it stuck in my head just when you were mentioning, your AAU coaches aren't going to tell you, parents aren't going to tell you. We've had a lot of conversations. Bobby's a parent. You're a parent of young kids. I'm a parent. I don't know if my kids will be into sports or not. We'll see. But I think that I always assume that parents have the best of intentions for their kids. But I think a lot of parents don't understand that really, for the most part, there's nothing that they can do that's going to help a kid get a scholarship. But there are things that they can do that are going to hurt a kid. That is going to, in my opinion, make coaches like, I don't want to have to deal with that. Just what is your view on the role of parents in the recruiting process itself? Because I've seen, coaches for the most part off the record, a guy that you worked under, Joe Jones, has been kind of blunt. We've had him on the show twice about how parents can kind of make him like, I don't want to have to deal with that headache. Just what advice do you have to parents whose kids are good enough that they're starting to get looks, and how, what parents can or can do or shouldn't do as part of the recruiting process?
So obviously, one of the things that we always check, especially after, we kind of hone in on a young prospect, we're hopping on Facebook and Instagram and X, and, we're checking the parents' feed, and we're checking, what they're retweeting and what they're posting. I mean, and then also, I think Danny Hurley had a great kind of line where he said they're always kind of evaluating the parents right on the sidelines. We're watching that stuff, AAU games, and, word gets out on some of those parents, right? If they're really overbearing, or they're, really, what they call them, I think, helicopter parents. So, it definitely could hurt their kid for sure, right? Depending on what they say. I mean, at the college level, even, I've heard stories about coaches getting text messages, and then it's like there's almost no barrier, right? Because there's such a instant access to technology, right, to get a hold of the coach or to send them a DM on a social media platform. And it's like, hey, I don't text the referee that we just had when we lose by a point and there was a bad foul, right? I have to show some restraint and have some discipline. We want parents that have that discipline too, right? Because if the parent doesn't have discipline, the apple probably doesn't too far from the tree.
Got a question. You had mentioned earlier that you had some success. You had more success in those first couple of years, right? And I believe you said you had, was it fourth and fifth year guys or fifth and sixth year guys? I'm not sure which one it was. Was it fourth?
Yeah,
Both.
both.
Okay.
So like, we were my first team. I had a transfer from Notre Dame, Elijah Burns. That was before the transfer portal, so he had to sit a semester because he had actually, and so he sat. And then I had another transfer, Don Carey, that came from Mount St. Mary's, and he was a little older. And then after that, we had recruited guys. So after my second year, we brought in 11 new players. And I want to say 8 were from the transfer portal, and 3 were freshmen. And that team finished third. One of my best players was a transfer from Northwestern, Anthony Gaines. He blew out his knee in the last play of the last regular season game that year. He's playing in Germany right now, so happy for his success. But then this past season, I was like, hey, we finished first, third, and third in my first 4 years. I wanted to try to at least have a foundation. I had 2 years on my contract left. So I had the past season, 23, 24, and then I had 2 years after that. So I'm thinking if I could take some high potential freshmen and then meld that next year with some junior college kids, some good incoming freshmen, and a couple kids from the portal, we'd be right back to competing for league titles. Right. And you know what? It just didn't come to fruition. Obviously now you're expected to win year in and year out, and there's no such thing as building a program, right? You're building 1 year teams. Right. But for me, that's only a part of the story, right? I had 2 freshmen. One missed 33 practices. The other missed 28. The one that missed 33 missed 10 games. And, he had a bad back, and they thought it was a back issue. Come to find out he had a stress fracture in his pelvis.
Oh, wow.
And he played. We were down some starters early in the season, and we lose by a bucket to Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And this young man, Michael Avagaro, he's at Central Arkansas now. In that game against Milwaukee, he had 18 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 assists as a freshman. And I played him at the 4. Another guy I had that was a freshman, he missed 28 practices in 7 games, Michael Ojo. So it's like when you have guys that miss, I can go through it. I got guys that miss 42 practices, 44 practices. 2 of my more consistent guys, I had a guy miss 5 practices and no games, and another guy missed 10 practices and no games. Well, they both transferred once I was fired. And it's like you can only adapt and adjust so much to try to be competitive. We lost 6 games by 16 points combined with various lineups because I was having to tweak things all the time. So, if you are an older team, that may help because, you have the leadership in the locker room and guys, if you take the right ones. One of my favorite guys I took in the portal was Michael Bayer. And I was just watching this game 2 years ago. We beat Iona in Coaches versus Cancer Day. And Michael's father had succumbed to cancer. He passed away. And Michael had a career game against Rick Pitino in Iona at MVP Arena. We won. We secured first place outright. And Michael was a manager at Iowa as a freshman and a practice player as a sophomore and junior. And he grew from 6'3" to 6'7". But he came to play for me because he wanted to win, he wanted to compete, and he loved the game. Those are the guys I do better with that are thankful and appreciative. And that's also something you got to be able to find in that recruiting process.
Well, that leads me to another question. Okay, so with these older players, first part of the question is what does that is that a harbinger of death for younger players coming out of high school? Because now you guys are forced to compete to win as coaches. And if you're not developed as a young man, in my opinion, if you're not developed emotionally enough, and if you don't have the right amount of talent, of course, you're not going to make it. So that's the first part of the question. What would you give, what advice would you give those younger players? Because, to me, it almost makes AAU, if you're not on a sneaker team, if you don't have it together as a person, then AAU almost becomes irrelevant, as far as grassroots, unless you're just really standing out. And you've got so many kids fighting for that one chance that it becomes difficult. The second part of the question is if that's the case, where do you draw the line as far as, okay, am I a hoard of talent or am I going to bet on the kid, because you're not only looking at high school kids, you're also looking at kids in the portal?
Yeah, so great questions. And I've been kind of diving into this with my sabbatical this year. If the NCAA goes to 15 scholarships or stays at 13, right? Say we're staying at 13. Well, at a low major or mid-major school, I think you can still recruit the portal, right? You still got to find the right guys in the portal. One, now you got to be able to pay them, because a lot of the guys in the portal are going in the portal because they want more money. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to recruit junior colleges, right? Because a lot of those kids that we're talking about, Bobby, that probably missed playing on that AAU team or not being as mature, they had to go to junior college, or they had to do a gap year, or they had to do a postgraduate year, go to an academy like IMG, right? So that's another, avenue that these kids can go to. And then you still got to recruit freshmen. So like I was going to overhaul my whole roster basically and only keep a couple guys this year, because if kids can go in the portal, I can also put them in the portal.
Right.
Right. So I was going to be able to get a better talented freshman, because you weren't the same player after your senior year of high school than when you were after almost your full summer going into your freshman year.
Right. Right.
So some coaches miss the boat because they evaluate too early. Other coaches do a great job. Like I would say, before the portal, Mark Schmidt was one of the best at signing kids late, because he would take the older kids that were at the prep schools that were either overlooked or continued to develop because of their work ethic and their coaching that they were getting. And now they're able to compete, at least in practice, to give his older guys. And it was almost like a feeder system.
Right.
So, it's different everywhere. I was going to take anywhere from 3 to 5 freshmen. I was going to take probably 2 to 3 JUCOs, and I was going to probably take 2 to 3 transfers. So that would have been 10 new guys. Wow. And that's basically every year, because like we said, you can't let them hold you hostage in terms of that. Before, athletic directors and people were always like, oh, it looks bad for APR if you keep moving these kids on. But also, if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, I mean, you don't want to keep them in your program, because that's going to turn into cancer in your locker room. So, and that's where having the older leadership was. And that was one flaw one mistake I made. I was thinking I could really ingrain our culture with our young guys, but my sophomore class was not ready to lead. They weren't ready to lead. And even some of the guys told me, and I had a mix of international guys too. So on top of them being sophomores not ready to lead, they're also internationals. They really needed that when they were freshmen with those 5th and 6th year guys. That really helped them. So that was an oversight on my fault, oversight on my behalf, because I was thinking, okay, these freshmen are going to be hungry. These sophomores have just gone through it. They're going to meld and do it together. But then we just had too many different things kind of get in the way. And that's the stuff, you can't really control, things on the outside as well.
It is crazy to me. I look at you, you're only in your mid-40s, which is very young in the head coaching world. But you've the game has changed so much. I look at your career arc, and you went to a public school, right? Public high school, not like a prep or anything.
You almost went to New Hampton Prep, had the deposit in, but I was a late bloomer and ended up going to New Hampshire instead of going to prep school. Yeah,
and
public high school.
Yeah, so you're only a couple years older than me, and I was like right at the tail end of that. You could still go to a public school in the Northeast and get a Division I scholarship out of it. And now the game has changed from that. It's basically, if you're going to get any sort of a D1 scholarship, even kind of D2, but especially D1, like it's almost like you have to go to a private school or go to a prep school to be seen. But when you came out, it wasn't quite that. When you were in college, you had to sit out a year before transferring. When you started coaching, NIL didn't exist. There was still recruiting was traditional, and I feel like so much of the game has changed over the past few years. We talk about it as I kind of got back into the college scene and watching from afar, at least. The mid-majors, low majors, it's other than schools that are in, say, the Ivy or the Patriot that have some requirements around really strict on transferring, really strict on not being able to redshirt or any of that sort of stuff. Other than those kind of selective conferences, recruiting freshmen, by and large, it seems like for low majors is kind of out. Like I feel like it's never been harder to get like a scholarship as a true freshman going into college at the Division I level, other than if you're a top 50 prospect in the country. If you're a guy, that has a high school player, they're like, oh, he might be an NBA player. Now low majors like, the America East schools, even some of the CAA schools, it's like they're recruiting Division II transfers, guys who light it up at the Division II level for 2 to 3 years to come in instead of high school freshmen, because they're like, those guys can right away compete. And it's like you're building a new roster every year. And so it's just like, how much has the game changed just during your time as a head coach?
And you could even add COVID into that,
Yep.
right? In terms of
the eligibility.
Eligibility, but also how kids interact.
Yep.
Right. These kids now were, basically confined to their homes and to, really being on their devices as opposed to really socially interacting. I would say, it's changed considerably in terms of everything you said, right? There's kids and programs wanting to stay older. Like I said, there's still, right now, it's obviously a smaller percentage, right? You're still going to take some high school kids that can come in and are coming from good programs if it had been coached. And then maybe, if you take them and say you're freshmen or you're 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, you got 5 freshmen a year, maybe at some level, there's still some value in redshirting, depending on that, and having some skill development, right? And someone's in charge of that. Those other 3 guys, you're hoping they can play. I always looked at it, and part of my pitch at Siena was, I play freshmen. So Jordan King was a freshman walk-on. He's playing professionally in Spain right now. He transferred to East Tennessee State, and then he was just at Richmond, and he was first-team All-A-10. And he played as a freshman. And every year I play a freshman. Now, you have to be ready to play, right? I'm going to play you. Well, you better be getting your sleep at night, doing what you're supposed to do, going to class, doing your work, because you're going to earn this opportunity, but that's why I recruited you. So there's part of it there. And then the other thing that really hasn't changed, though, it's still all about relationships. It's still all about building that relationship. It's still about the trust. It's still about the accountability. But yeah, it's really changed. And then, what else has changed, Sam, is and I'm sure when Bobby was in college, you had probably some 4.5 hour practices, right? Coach was pissed. You just lost. I mean, you're on the line, you're doing sprints, and you guys are still going. Yeah. Well, these times, especially with kids getting paid, you're not really trying to run them into the ground because you need them to play, because the guys that are paying these players the money don't want to see them hurt on the sideline, because now that's their investment. Now they're pissed at you. Yeah. So I was doing a bunch of different things, and a lot of these programs now are kind of running college programs like NBA programs. You have a skill development session in the morning. You have yoga. You have mindfulness. You have time in the aquatherapy room in a cold tub or a hot tub. You're getting massages. And then practice is more or less 5-on-0 and 3-on-3 and breakdown drills. And, you're competing some, but you're not competing like we used to compete every drill, and guys diving on the floor and, getting getting butterflies on your lip because you got a bow and you're bleeding and you jump back into, like, that's not happening. Now, some programs it is, but then the other thing is you got to have deep rosters, right? So at the mid-major level, in the low-major level, you don't have the same access to the same technology in the training room. You don't have the same access to the high-end sport performance coach. You have a strength coach that may have to have 4 or 5 other teams, right? So that's also a benefit of taking guys that come down from the higher levels, right? Because Anthony Gaines, that was at Northwestern, even though he's had his shoulder repaired and an ankle injury or a knee injury, the way he recovered and was rehabbed, I know he's going to be able to get on the court. And now he knows how to take care of his body. Right. So I kind of added some different things in there. But, so there's definitely more strategy involved, right? It's not just finding them. Before it was, hey, find the best high school kids and take them. And if you find a transfer that has to sit out, that's going to be able to replace an all-conference guy that was a senior, that was what you would do, right? You'd sit out a good player to replace a good player. Now you have 5 guys go in the portal. You replace them from 5 guys from the portal, right? You get, some freshmen that weren't good enough that you made mistakes on. You put them in the portal and you replace them with freshmen that you think can play. But there's so many trains of thought. There's so many different things now that a head coach has to deal with. And then also you look at the resources, right? So at a low major or mid major, you're probably not having the resources to hire a GM. So now at that level, the head coach has to be the GM and has to do fundraising and has to, talk to all these other guys on top of coaching the team and making sure everyone's on the same page and doing team building, right? And sometimes there's not enough resources.
Which leads me to another question. With your recruits, in recruiting now, it seems like that every year you have to, I'm not sure if this is a word, but re-recruit the freshmen that just came in or the
sophomores or the juniors or even the seniors.
Right, exactly.
It's crazy.
You're trying to keep those kids there knowing that they came in, okay, maybe one because they couldn't get a high of an offer as they thought that they would get, so they had to settle for something less. And right away they're looking to leave when you play them. So you're basically recruiting mercenaries. Now, in the business itself, you've got other coaches who are recruiting the kid, and now you've got to maintain a relationship with this other coach who wants your kid. How in the hell does that work, man? I mean, the level of patience that you have to have, the level of insecurity that you have to deal with, and you every day you've got to fight just to keep your own sanity.
Great. Yeah, so 1 year teams, right? And then at the end, you have to try to negotiate or, say, hey, my thing was you come to play for me for 2 years, then go get your big money, okay. Right? Jalen Pickett went to Penn State from Siena. Javian McCollum went to Oklahoma and now is at Georgia Tech from Siena. Giovanni Amajuru from Siena, from Sam Houston State to Siena, now to George Mason. Jared Billups from Siena to George Mason. Colby Rogers, Cal Poly, Siena, Wichita State, Memphis. So guys are going to leave, right? Jordan King, same thing. Siena, East Tennessee State, Richmond. But you have to be able to let them know where the line is in the sand. Don't worry about your next school, right? Don't worry about your numbers. You'll get paid more if we win. You have to deal with that, though. That social media creates just tidal waves of anxiety, emotions, fake news. I mean, we beat Florida State on national TV 2 years ago down in Disney. We lose to Ole Miss, and we finished third. We beat Seton Hall. Javian McCollum played great. He's got agents and people already reaching out to him and blowing up his social media and tweeting about him. And, well, that's not healthy for his teammates. And now he's hurt, and we got to get him back healthy. And then, he's got a back issue. And so how are you navigating all that stuff, right? And we were still good enough to win games without him. But that's why you also have to have a talented roster, and you always have to be recruiting, right? That's the name of the game is you always have to be bringing in talent no matter who's on your roster because you don't know when they can leave. And then you're having honest conversations after the season. Some coaches say if we have an NIL collective and we're paying our players, let's pay them all, freshmen. No freshman gets more than $10,000. Okay. Well, there's a special freshman we can get, but he needs 25. Are you taking him? Or is he going to mess up your locker room? Right? Okay, and then there's retention. How much money do you have in the budget for retention? A sophomore that plays well, you're probably not keeping him. A sophomore that plays well that was getting 25, who cares if you can give him 75? He can go get 150 at a power conference school.
Exactly.
So it doesn't make sense to even offer him that money. But if you offer him that money and you don't offer that money to retain somebody else that thinks they're just as good, you created an issue. And Bobby, the last thing is, you talk about the recruiting process. What kid doesn't want to go high major? Every kid eventually settles, right? The kid that wants to go to Duke has to settle for, say, school W, right? The kid that wants to go to school W has to settle for school X. The school that wants, so like everyone per se is settling. But then also in the recruiting process, you find the parents that see the value in the education, see the value in the coaching, are coming from a good program, realize that, hey, coach really sees and appreciates my game, knows that he can get me to that high major level, but I want to go play as a freshman and win. Well, those are the guys you got to find. So there is still a niche for that, but it's a lot more work, a lot more intel, a lot more, truth seeking. And then also, like for me, I've been at prep schools just to keep relationships alive, to see the college coaches that are in the gym, to see the prep school coaches, to network, but also to have a great list of high school prospects. But now it's like, okay, well, maybe it's going to be when they're in the portal after 2 years, right? But it's just to know all the kids in the gym. But yeah, no, great questions. And that's where it's kind of changed. That's where I said you got 1-year teams. You don't have programs. And then that's also changed the game some, right? Before, as a freshman, you're installing stuff in the summer and you're building some things, right? Mm-hmm. And then as a sophomore, if you have a team with a lot of guys coming back, you're adding layers to your offense. And then as a junior, you're returning back. Now you have a lot more wrinkles to within your offense and your offensive families, right? But now, same thing defensively. You could do more things defensively. You teach your 1-3-1 and guys really get it their freshman year. And then their sophomore year, they're taking a jump. Mm-hmm. Now you see so many teams in the college level, they switch 1-4. Right? Switch 1-4, it's a lot easier. Switch ball screens 1-4, and now we're in the gaps, and everyone's kind of playing similarly. So that was the other thing I tried to do, was I tried to play a little differently, where I tried not to switch too much. I tried to play old school man-to-man, but with a younger team, it was a little harder to do. So there's so many different things to unpack there in terms of building the program, the philosophy, the recruiting. How do you do summer work? Before, like this past season, I couldn't find the point guard in the portal that I wanted to replace Javian McCullum with. And so I said, all right, well, we're going to play more motion. And so I won't really need a true point guard. I'll need somebody that can move the ball and somebody that can cut and we'll kind of do it by committee. But I had a bunch of interchangeable pieces, but then the injuries killed me and we could never really take off. And all summer I worked on motion concepts. Right. And all fall I worked on motion concepts. But then there wasn't enough connectivity between the group because of all the different injuries. So then I had to go back to kind of put in some set plays, but now you're not as sharp in the set plays because you didn't use that time in the summer and in the preseason to really work on the set plays and the counter for those set plays. So like it's all connected, right? As you know, it's all connected.
I want to get into your time coaching. I mean, we've been talking about your time coaching, but like your history in the area, because you're still living in the Albany area. You grew up in the Albany area in upstate New York. You went to UNH for 3 years and then wound up at Siena for 1. And back then, you had to sit a year to play a year, right? Yep. So I want to ask you about sort of that arc. Like, how does that come to pass? I know you were a late bloomer, so maybe you weren't. I don't even know if you were on Siena's radar. Is that a school that you always wanted to play at but didn't have the opportunity right out of high school? Like, just tell me about your sort of college journey through college hoops and how it kind of came full circle to being back at Siena as a fifth-year senior.
I visited Brown. Actually, Brown recruited me. My grades weren't good enough coming out of Shenandoah. Bucknell had offered me a scholarship, but back then it was Patriot League, and it wasn't a scholarship. Mm-hmm. It was a roster spot.
Yeah.
And then I had a bunch of Division II offers, and I went to Vegas with the City Rocks, was the team I played for before they were sponsored by Nike, and got an offer from San Diego and an offer from University of New Hampshire. And I was like, hey, I'm not going to go to New Hampton prep school, even though my deposit was in. I wanted to start playing, and I go to New Hampshire, and that's fine. I'm there. I ended up starting the last 12 games of my freshman year and almost every game since. But, we just couldn't get over the hump and win. Siena really didn't recruit me out of high school, even though I was like the Times Union Player of the Year, all those different accolades. We won. We were 22-2 my senior year at Shenandoah, won a Section 2 title. Long story short, I transfer, sit out for Paul Hewitt, and then Paul gets the Georgia Tech job, and we won a regular season title. So I took pride in being a guy that came to practice every day and had a guard, Marcus Faison, who was a tremendous player. Yeah. Then Louis Orr comes, and obviously Coach passed away from cancer. He's in heaven, smiling down on us. But and then we won a share of the regular season title there in my last year. And my grandfather put me through school. He paid for my tuition at Siena. I was a walk-on, so I was full scholarship at UNH, but I wanted to go to Siena and prove that I could do it. And I was actually sixth man. I was a scholar athlete. I graduated with over a 3.5, and we won 20 games. And so I was like, okay, well, I knew this was going to be the type of role I was going to have when I played over in Europe with a Italian passport. So from there, it was, I finished playing overseas, and Fran McCaffrey gets a job at Siena. So I worked for him as his director of operations. That was $3,000, no health benefits. My office was in a locker room with no windows, and that was a bunch of VHS and VCRs, right? So you got all the VHS tapes, and you got like 6 VCRs, and I had to do film exchange. Now all these young guys got it so easy. They hit a button on Synergy and download a game, and it's done. I was driving through the night to pick up a VHS tape for a team that just lost on the road and had to follow their bus back to their campus to grab the tape to drive back to put it on Fran's desk. So then, my journey as an assistant, I was fortunate enough to work for Fran that year, but then I went back and coached AAU because there wasn't really a chance to move up on his staff with the way his staff was made. Worked with kids with special needs as a one-on-one aide, autism, Down syndrome, emotionally disturbed young people. It was so rewarding. And that was really, I was like, man, I really just want to coach and be an assistant. And I kind of had cut my teeth on being a director of ops, really learned the business from Fran. And then I went to Fairfield, met Ed Cooley, was there 3 years, and we had probably the best run in Fairfield's history at the time. We went to back-to-back postseasons, the first time Fairfield's ever done that. We win, we go to Providence. I'm there for like 5 or 6 months, and that's kind of when I meet you after, when I go to BU with Joe Jones, who's great. Really enjoyed my time there. And it's funny, and I use this story because I tell my wife, you don't know why things happen, and they happen, and there's a reason, right? There's a bigger plan. And, at Providence was great. I was going to be an assistant coach, and then coach had to put me in the director of ops role there. But I wanted to keep my growth. And, I could have stayed at the Big East making great money as a director of ops for Ed, but I wanted to keep growing. So I went and fortunate to get to know Joe, and he hired me. And that's like 2 years later, our first year going into the Patriot League, I get offered a job at Virginia Tech because we had gotten the kid Cedric Hankerson over Virginia Tech in Minnesota. And that was a big recruit for us, and we were so ecstatic about that. And so by being able to get Cedric to come to Boston U, James Johnson, the coach at the time at Virginia Tech, wanted to hire me as an assistant at Virginia Tech. And Joe thought I was going to leave. And I go and I visit, and I'm like, not sure. And obviously the young kid in me, or young man in me, sees ACC. I'm only, probably 31 or 32, but I was kind of just wasn't sure. And lo and behold, that guy gets fired the next year. We win the Patriot League title that year. And that same year, I meet my wife in Boston. So, I think everything happens for a reason. And then, from there, I go to GW, there 4 years. Our first child is born, Reese. And then I have a chance to come back home to work for Jamie and Christian at Siena. And it was a pay cut. But I've never coached for the money, right? You coach because you love it. And we wanted to get closer to my wife's family in Boston and be near my family in upstate New York. So I helped Jamie, and we win 17 games from 8 games the year before, one of the biggest turnarounds in the country. And I was their defensive coordinator. And then Jamian gets the GW job, and I slide over to be the head coach at Siena, my alma mater. So it was like, I always just say, when you do things for the right reasons, and you have pure intentions, things always work out. So, and then that's kind of where we were. Obviously, COVID stinks because my best 2 teams were through COVID. We win 20 games my first year, 10-game winning streak to end the season, and COVID hits. And then we're the second to last Division I team with a preseason favorite team that next year. We're the second to last Division I team to even play. We don't play till like early January. And I also had to deal with Rick Pitino coming to the league. So it's never, but like I said, it all happens for a reason.
I want to ask you, because obviously you've got, like we said, deep history in the area. Siena, I would assume going back there to coach means more than just another job. 1, it's your first head coaching gig. 2, it's your alma mater. 3, you're in the backyard of sort of where you grew up and family and everything. And you go there, and one of my friends who really knows the game, we were texting all along, like, they can't really fire Carm. If you look at his record, if you look at the 21 seasons, if you look at getting an NCAA bid even if you guys weren't able to play in it. Like, like they can't be serious about this. And then it happens, and we're like, this is. How could anyone want to go there and coach after this? It's like the unrealistic expectations and view of where Siena stands in the college basketball landscape. And I'm not here to get you to say anything negative about anyone, but it's just I empathize because the game changed so much while you were there too. You have success, you do great in the beginning, and then COVID and NIL and money, and Siena, no matter what the fan base wants to think, is still a low to mid major. And is never going to have the kind of money that people think they should have, or sway that they think they should have. What do you view? How do you look back on that time there? Now I know it's really recent, and it's gotta hurt like hell to be just blunt about it. But like, how do you look back on the time you spent there? You had success. You only had one losing season your whole time there, and it just to me seems like was a totally raw deal. But obviously, you must have gone there with a real affinity for the area and the school. It's your alma mater. It's where you grew up. Like, I know you haven't had a ton of distance from it yet, but how do you look back on your time there?
Yeah, it's obviously hard, right? You give everything you have to a program that you want to see do well. But obviously, college basketball is a business. But the way I look at it is, to be at Siena College as my first head coaching job, it was an opportunity for me to learn at the highest level, right? I was able to learn, and now looking back, some things to do, some things not to do. Because I was on the road since January. In the MAC, you play Friday, Sunday.
Right.
I was on the road after the game Sunday because it was an afternoon game. I was on the road Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, back for Wednesday's practice, Thursday's practice, play Friday, prep Saturday, play Sunday, and then I was on the road again. And so, it still fires me up a little bit, but I have to step back and look that it's just making me better for my next opportunity.
I think what you just explained were a lot of the complexities involved in college coaching. Whatever kids are end up watching this, and I'm going to suggest to a lot of kids, especially in the AAU teams, that the kids that I deal with, that they watch this, and I'm going to say it because what you've done so far is you've exposed your heart, and what these guys don't understand is that we had said earlier that, and you specifically had mentioned that this is not college sports, this is the business of college sports. And they're going to have to present themselves as young businessmen and women. You mentioned leadership, and I believe that when you're talking leadership, and I hear about how much you've had to go inward just to keep it together. The hardest person to ever lead is going to be yourself. So from what I've heard from you, I can only say, and I don't think we're done yet, but I can only say that I'm extremely impressed, and I'm proud to know you, because this is extremely difficult, and just to hear the fight in you, it gives me hope that the kids won't be lost. If they find you, that they'll be okay.
I appreciate that. It's all I'm doing is now just trying to learn the best I can and gather as much information and make this a positive step. That this was a necessary step to get me to where God has planned to make an even greater impact and to be able to continue to grow. Right? Like I said, you have to be able to recognize your flaws and move forward. I've recognized the mistakes I've made and gotten better from it, and it's also helped me. I would say know in my heart that I've been honest with myself. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people these days, they can't handle the truth and they're not honest with themselves.
Well, I think that, touching on that, I think everybody's saying, well, everybody has their own truth. Well, that may be true, but I don't think you have to add anything to truth. It just is. A is A, okay? And the reason I'm saying that is because I want to ask you, who were the most important influences for you before your coaching career and during your coaching career so far? Which coaches were they? Which people were they?
Well, obviously my family, my mom and dad, my sister, those three were always the ones believing in me, even back when I was told I was a Division III player and, I wasn't going to be anything, and just go Division III and get into politics and then, get a real job. And so I would say, obviously my family. And then even, younger coaches that kind of impacted me at a young age. And then obviously, Coach McCaffrey and Coach Cooley, Jamie and Christian. I mean, all guys that I talked to. But I think at the end of the day, it's about knowing what makes you work. It's about, what is your morning routine, Bobby, and your morning routine, Sam, is going to be different than my morning routine. But it's going to put me in the best place. I was listening to Dan Hurley talk the other day. And, if he gets to the office early, he doesn't open his door till like 10 a.m. And that's when he's ready to see people and have people come in and come out. And so I'm thinking, and I'm like, you know what? I was almost too accessible, right? I was the guy that everyone would come to talk to. I was the guy that would be, and you know what? We were losing games and we're having a terrible season, yet I'm still smiling. I'm still positive. I'm still talking to people. And so I really thought about that stuff too, right? Like, hey, I needed to be more guarded with the media, right? Short answers like Bill Belichick, right? I needed to be able to be less accessible and to demand things on my time as opposed to being so accommodating to others, right? Now, there's a give and take with that. But, I would say, and all I've been doing is just trying to learn as much as I can, right? And you go, and I'll go to college practices and I'll go to different things. And it's basketball, right? You have to be able to teach, but everyone's teaching the same thing. It's just different terminology, right? And then it's being able to get the players to understand it and grasp it. But I would say, my family's the biggest ones for me, is just, being able to have them and then it's also following your heart, right? Because, to get into this business, you have to have the support of everybody because it's a journey.
You talk about how important your family is. And I'm curious about, you mentioned your schedule, which to me is just like, it's really, I don't know who in their right mind, if you didn't just absolutely love the game of basketball, would want to coach it at the Division I college level as a head coach, where you're talking about, you've got, Friday game, Saturday prep, Sunday game. So if you're on the road, you're away. If you're at home, you're still buried in that. Then you're basically on the road from Sunday night after the game until Wednesday when you're back for game prep. How you have two really young kids, you have a wife. How did your family handle that? How did they navigate that in season? It's certainly not a life that's for everyone or for most people. How'd you navigate that during the season?
Man, that's credit to my wife, just being able to, find time. So my thing was too, and I wouldn't change this for anything. We practice. So I get to work early. And we practice, say, 3 o'clock. So we're 3 to 5, 5:30. I would always make a point to be home for dinner and bedtime. And then I have an office like I'm in right now. I got my whiteboard, I got my TV, I got my laptop. I'm working from home. And that's one thing I think COVID was able to teach us, was that you can kind of build your schedules and you can still accomplish things without having to go to work per se. Now, I do say COVID made a lot of people figure out that they could be lazy and act like they were getting things done. And then the other people that realized they could be more productive with how to get things done. So I took the more productive route. But no, that's a credit to my wife, her love for me and seeing when my passion and my heart is in the game. And my wife says I have toxic positivity. And I said, I don't know if it's toxic, but I said, for me, the only way to live life is to be positive, and that's how I look at it.
I've been in a position where I've lost jobs before, and it's just, it's scary. You have a family, financially, all that, but like ego as well. It stings, and a day can feel like a week, can feel like a year. But I'm wondering, you referenced, I think you called it taking a sabbatical this year. You've had that crazy schedule up until now. You've been coaching for, a very long time. You were playing before that. So the day in, day out grind and travel of when you're a player, and then when you're an assistant, or a dobo, and then an assistant coach and everything. What is this? What what has this year been like for you so far? What are you looking to get out of this year? I'm sure you could have just hopped somewhere. You know, you're well regarded, you're really well liked in the coaching industry. I'm sure that you could have found, if you were like, I need a life raft out, you could have found one somewhere to get on someone's staff. So I'm sure that was probably a conscious choice to be like, I'm going to take a year to kind of whatever it may be, if it's ground myself, if it's spend time with family, if it's whatever. So what is your goals for this year, and what's it been like so far to have a year where you are not in the day in, day out grind for the first time in decades, probably?
Yeah, so I've really been enjoying getting my daughter off the bus. I take my youngest guy for a 3-mile walk every morning, get him down for a nap. I get my other guy sometimes from his school as well. You know, he's only 4. So just really enjoying that. You know, my wife works a couple days a week. So those other days, you know, I still kind of build a schedule to go keep relationships, you know, thriving in terms of visiting prep school, high school coaches, or going to a college practice. Just to be around the game and to be, you know, you got to be in sight, right? You don't want to be out of sight, out of mind. You want to be in sight and know. And then I've also been really working the phones, really trying to gather intel on where this is going with college athletics, college basketball. You know, I think conference realignment will take some shape. Getting to know more agents and agencies, because there's so many guys that now represent players in the portal or represent players going into the NBA. So I've really been trying to stay busy. My whiteboard looks like I'm a surgeon in terms of, all the things I got going. But then just really trying to build relationships too. And, you know, if I see a young man at a high school or prep school and I think he's good, or I think he can help a buddy of mine at a school, I'll shoot them the contact and give my kind of assessment of that player. So just trying to be a conduit, trying to be a bridge, and also just still trying to help. You know, I'll still give back to the community. So just staying busy, working on myself, watching a lot of film at night as well, you know, former games, European stuff, and then I'll go to some clinics too. So yeah, really, like I said, making the most of it. So I'm actually going to be ahead of it as opposed to being, behind it. And the other thing people don't realize, and I needed to do a better job of this. This is the other thing I learned. You know, when you're a head coach, you're more concerned with calling the recruits you got to call and the high school coaches you have to call. You're not concerned about networking, right? You're not concerned with networking for your next job when you're a head coach, or networking to build more relationships. Now, obviously, you're building relationships through assistants that have relationships that you want to, kind of bring to yourself so you can help get a player if your assistant has a good relationship with somebody. But, you just continually working on that stuff. So, my calendar is booked. I'm going to take some time to go see my Atlanta Falcons. I'm a Falcons football fan. Unfortunately, got the Eagles the other night, but so I'm going to go down there. I'm going to go to, a couple practices, whether I can get to, Big East schools, some MAC schools, just to see a little bit of everything and, keep learning. It's also good for me to be like, man, we did this, or did you ever think about this? And like I said, just trying to help people where I can. Have you started to think about,
everything that you're saying is, I'm going to keep coaching. This is what I want to do. It can be really hard for guys who have been a head coach to then go back into, say, an assistant role at a higher level school. They may be saying, like, some guys are like, hey, I liked not having to be the guy. Other guys are like, it's going to be really hard to go be a number 2 somewhere else after being the number 1. Have you thought about what sort of role you'd be looking for? Also, you have a family with kids. It is not easy to potentially be uprooting every 4 or 5 years. Even if you're a great coach, let's say you're an assistant for a great coach. Well, now he's got an opportunity to move up somewhere else. And it's like, oh, well, now I've got to move on because, the staffs move when the head guy moves. Or if you're the head guy, you go somewhere else. Going somewhere else might mean leaving the area that you're attached to, or you go somewhere else and then you have success. And now it's like, well, now I've got the opportunity to move up, because in the low to mid-major level, it's sort of like very rarely do people stay pat for 20 years anymore at a low to mid-major. It's like, move up or kind of die off in a couple of years because everyone wants to just consistently be winning. Have you thought about what the requirements are for that next step, or are you kind of still in the researching phase and open to everything?
Well, one, I love being an assistant. different. It's different than being a head coach, right? You're still involved. Obviously, as a head coach, the biggest difference is all the decisions you have to make. So I think that's where I can add value to a head coach in terms of, helping, limit what comes across his desk. And then, the recruiting piece I've always loved, the game planning piece I've always loved. I love being a defensive coordinator. I've kind of researched the general manager type role just to see what that entails at certain schools. But also, director of player personnel, skill development, all the stuff I love doing. I kind of would love to be able to, put that in an all-encompassing job title. And then, yeah, we've talked about the moving part. It has to be the right job. It's a family decision. This for me and this next job I take, whether it's this year or next year, I had 2 years on my contract left at Siena. The way my contract was structured, that's something else I learned is, you got to be able to kind of navigate those contracts. But I still am being able to make some income. So that's been a positive. But, it's a family decision. So if we have to move, it'll be up to my wife as well and my kids. And, kind of excited just to live day by day. As long as my family's in a good spot, I'm in a good spot.
Carm, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us this morning. It was really an awesome conversation. There wasn't no dull moments or awkward pauses, man. It was an awesome talk. Hoping to actually cross paths with you in person down the road, because it's been, probably about a decade since I saw you now, which is crazy to me. I
may be in Boston. I'm hoping to be there at least once or twice. My wife's from Quincy.
Yep.
So, okay. We bring the grandkids up, and, definitely we'll have to go grab a meal, all of us.
Well, thanks for joining us, Carm. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Carm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys.